We live in a world of customizations, and if you can make your website customizable, you'll make people who visit your site feel like they're a part of what you're doing because they've had a say in how it looks and feels for them. What we're going to do today is set up these theme buttons up top where you can come in here and select a light theme, a dark theme, or some kind of custom theme, and then the user's browser will respond and remember this. So if I were to come in here and refresh, it's going to remember the exact theme I chose last time. Now, if I don't set a default theme, it'll use whatever my system is. So if I'm dark mode, it will look like this. If I'm on light mode, it will look like this. All of this adapts, and you can see I've got this nice theming all throughout the entire document. Now today I'm not going to show you how to make these. I'll simply paste these in at the end of the video. We're going to focus really on how these three things work, how to save them to the local storage. But if you're interested in how I did either the forms or these buttons and all this customization, I've done videos showing how to do that in the last couple of weeks, and I'll make sure to add links in the description. All right, let's jump right in. Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. I've gone ahead and started with a very basic setup so that we can stay focused on the theming rather than building out kind of this ancillary stuff. And then I will explain how we're going to build out the entire theming system, how we'll save it to local storage so that as people come to your site will be ready and set to go with their theme, whatever chosen theme that happens to be. And we'll do all that in the latter part of this video. So now let me just show you kind of what I've got so far. I've got a very basic HTML document here. And you can see here that I've got it linked to a style sheet right over here. I'll show you that in a second. And inside here, I've got some very basic divs and H2s. That's it. You can notice that I've got classes on these here that we're going to style here in a little bit. Okay, if I come over here to the style sheet and go ahead and close this down, you'll see that I've got a basic clear here, setting everything to box sizing of border box and removing padding and margin. Then for the body, I've gone ahead and just set a background color and a color for the text, and then kind of standard stuff for the font. And then in this container, basically, I'm just centering everything and putting a gap between everything. Okay, so that's what I've got so far. Now here comes the actual theming. So what I want to turn our attention to first is how do we use CSS variables just to style the colors, the standard colors on our site before we even think about changing anything. So let's do that first of all. And I'm going to start by defining all of these at the root. Now this root is essentially the same as the HTML. And I have several things we paste in here just to save you watching me type them. But to start with, I've got some controlling variables, and I like to prefix these with an underscore to show that these basically will impact all kinds of things throughout the site. So sometimes there'll be things like color, so this will be like the hue for the HSL values we're going to provide here in a second. Sometimes there'll be things like font sizing. So this font size is going to control everything else on the site because most other things are set with M units, which means they're going to be responsive based on their parent's size, in this case, the body. So you can see here I've got a radius that has this 0.2M, and that depends on the font size itself. Now, I've also got some transition properties like a fast and a slow speed, and then also a cubic Bezier curve. And so this allows me to use these throughout the project without having to copy and paste code. I just reference these variables. If I want to update them, I update these variables. All right, so that's what we're going to start with. Next, when it comes to actual color theming, I'm going to go ahead and write in here light color scheme just to keep this organized. So I pasted in these values and notice a couple of things about them. Number one, we've got a background, that's what this points to, _light. So this is the light theme, and this happens for all of these. So I've got background, text, muted, accent, and secondary. Next, notice that I'm pulling in this hue value right here from up above. So I'm going to use this color value to set all of these. And then I've essentially just looked for different options that work well for me. Now, typically for HSL, you're going to wrap it like this. You're going to give it three values. First of all will be the hue. So I could do like 100, and you don't have to do commas. So I'm not doing commas here. You can do like 80%. That means 80% of saturation. So it's going to be fairly saturated. And then finally a lightness value. In this case, because it's the background for a light theme, it's going to be 99%. And I've got an extension here that actually shows you exactly what that's like. So if I were to change this to like 19%, you can see that this 100 is actually the hue of like a green color. Now in our case, we've got a 200, so let's see what that is. Not 2000, 200, so it's like a bluish color. And if I were to put this at like 50% opacity, somewhere around there, you can see this is kind of the general hue of the color that we've generated everything off of. So all I've done is essentially removed this section out from underneath this function, and we're going to wrap it in a second. I'll show you how and why we're doing it. You can see here for then the text, I want the text to be a dark color. It uses the same hue, happens to have the same saturation as well. For muted, I've reduced the saturation quite a bit, and then this is a generally light color. Accent is the same kind of thing. And then for the secondary light, you can see what I've done is I've actually done a calculation and I just subtracted 195. Now, because HSL can wrap essentially every 360 degrees, it restarts the color wheel. It doesn't matter if this goes negative or above 360. However I calculate this isn't a huge deal. It should work no matter what. Now, before we get too fancy, let me go ahead and come in here. And now what I want to do is I'm going to point these values right here to some other values that we're going to use all throughout our system. So all I'm going to do is take the background here without any kind of suffix on it, like light or dark or custom or anything like that. And we're going to point this simply to a var of bg light. And now let me go ahead and paste this down or copy this down several times. And let's do the same thing. So I'm going to come in here and say text for the text one. For this muted one, I will say muted. For the accent, I'll say accent. And finally, for the secondary, I'll say secondary. Looks like I got an extra one in there I didn't need. So now what I can do is use these values here, and as soon as I update these values, they'll point to either light or dark, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's just use them to start with. So I'm going to come in here and change a couple things. First of all, I've got this font size. Let's go ahead and point this to my size. So this is going to control everything else. Next, I'm going to come in here for this background color. I'm going to point this to my background. And in a second, I'll show you why this is not going to work. But for now, let's go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to point this one to my text. Now, you remember that HSL normally has to be wrapped like this inside of an HSL function. But we didn't do that up top. Now, why is that? Well, let me show you. What I'm going to do is come down here and I'm going to wrap this variable, first of all, like this. And now you can see that that picks up that background color. It's almost white, so it's hard to see. But this should be a little bit easier to see. In fact, let's change this to accent, just so you can tell. So you can see how this actually pulls in this color. Now, I like to never have like a true white or a true black because it's much nicer to actually theme that just with the hue value, even though maybe viewers on your site won't notice it right off. It makes it look more professional when it's actually slightly has some kind of tint to it or hue to it. So you can see here I'm wrapping these variables in HSL, and let me show you why now. Actually, let's come back and change this, and then I'm going to change this because it'll be a little bit easier to see to accent. So the background will all be accent. Now what I can do, because HSL values normally are written like this, like I showed you, they've got 3 values, and then you can do a / if you don't do commas, and just give like 0.4 or something like that. And that will actually add an opacity automatically. You don't have to say HSLA or anything like that. And that's fairly new in CSS, but it's been around long enough to where you can use it. So I can come in here and just say like 0.2, and automatically in the document, now I have this opaque version of my accent color. I can change it to like 0.8. That works just fine. So this is great, especially for box shadows and things like that. As you theme stuff out, to not have to think ahead of time of how you're going to make certain values in your color system opaque. You can just define them and then do it in line when you need to. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this and change this back to background. And now we should be set and ready to go. Now we've set this for light mode. I want to actually come in here and define some dark values as well. So let's do the same thing here. I'm going to come in here and say dark color scheme. And I'm going to go ahead and paste in my dark values. You'll notice it's the same thing, except the background for the dark is now a dark lightness as opposed to like a light lightness, and vice versa for all the colors throughout the system. All right, so how do I actually apply these to dark mode themes? Let's think about, first of all, think about how a user's system preferences might interact with this. So I'm going to come down here, and rather than setting this inside of here as like the default, let's go ahead and just add this as a media query. So I'll say media. And in this case, what I'm wanting is prefers color scheme. And what I'm looking for is light. So when that's the case, what I want to do is just move all this down here. And we're going to put it inside of a root, just like that. So I guess I should have done that first. Let's move this up here now, just like that. Okay, so now all of those should prefer color scheme light. So when I'm preferring that on my machine, it should point to these default values. And it is, you can see over here. Now there's one other property I'm going to want to add here, and that is the color scheme property. I want to set this to light. What this does is sets the default for like forms and your scroll bar and all that to be a light theme. Now what I can do then is just come down here and copy these all down, and it's pretty easy to switch these out. I'm just going to grab this very first one here that says dark, and then hit Command D, Command D, Command D, Command D, Command D, and one more time and change all these to dark. Now, if I change my system to dark like I did just now, you can see now it grabs all those colors as opposed to the light values. And if I switch my machine back to light, there we go. All right, so this is how you can very quickly use a user's preference on their machine to set whether it's light or dark mode. That leaves one more color scheme to set, and then we'll actually code out that top bar with the 3 buttons up top. So let's come in here, and inside this root as well, I'm going to go ahead and do one more, and we'll just call this like custom color scheme. All right, and I'm going to come in here and go ahead and paste these values in as well. And you can see that here I'm actually not using my hue. I'm intentionally just using like random colors. They don't even look that good. The point is just showing you can do whatever you want here. Then what I'm going to do is come down here below because, you know, on a system machine, they're only going to have light and dark. How do we set other items? Well, what I want to do is I want to say, hey, here are the defaults if they don't choose an item. However, if they choose one of the items I'm going to give them, so like if they choose it to be light, even if their machine is dark, or if they choose it to be dark, even if their machine is light, I want to honor that preference over this. Well, with a cascade, anything that comes later in CSS is obviously going to override the earlier. So what we're going to do is use a data theme like this. So it's just a custom attribute we're going to make up, and it'll be called light or dark or custom. And what I have to do is just come in here and do the exact same thing we just did. So let me go ahead and copy these in right here. See, I'm going to actually just grab this right here, and notice I'm not actually grabbing the root. So when I set this data theme light, we're going to do it on the root itself. So whenever this is true on the root, then go ahead and update these. We'll do the same thing here, and now we'll grab the dark. So again, I'm going to select all those with Command D and change all those to dark. And then finally, that means we can grab the last one here and just say something like custom. So if I grab that, I guess I should have done all those at the same time. So we'll say custom. And in this case, my custom one happens to be better light than dark, so it'll look better with that light theme. Now, let's just manually change this just so you can see what this looks like. So you can see my system is in dark mode here, so that's the default. However, if I come up here to the top, just type in data theme, and this is going to be equal to light. Let's start there, and you can see that automatically this is overriding the default system on my machine. In fact, if I pull this up, you should see that it's overriding this default media query here. So this is what it would be. However, I've chosen to make it light. Now I can also come in here and change this to like something like custom. And this should actually apply my custom theme. Now it's hard to see because it's very similar to the dark or to the light value, but if I come down here, you can see that it is actually pointing to these custom variables instead. So that's what we're going to use, and we're going to toggle that based on which button we click. Now to actually see this a little bit more in action, let's come down here, and in addition to this container, let's go ahead and add that text accent. This is just going to change the default value here, in this case, to my color of accent. And again, because I'm just pointing to this global variable all throughout, I'm going to let this decide whether it points to the light version, the dark version, or the custom version. I just always point to this main one, and then all my media queries and custom selectors up top will change that. Okay, so we've got a couple other options here. I think we had a secondary, and then we had a muted, and I guess we did have a fourth one, but it was the default, so I don't need this here. So I'll go ahead and remove that, and you can see here, default accent secondary muted. So if I could pull this back up, and we come back over to the elements, you can see that my when I refreshed, it went back to the dark mode theme. If I come in here and say data theme equals light, like that, you can see it goes to light. If I come in here and say this equals custom, then it goes to my custom theme. So all of this is updating based on this one little attribute right here that we're adding in. All right, so with that set, we're now ready and prepared to go ahead and write that top section. So let's do that next. So let's come over here, and right inside the body, let's add an aside tag. This will simply have a class of theme wrapper, and inside here I'll have a theme container div. Now, because this is going to have a group of 3 items, I want to make sure that when assistive technology looks at this, so that it understands that this is a group. So let's go ahead and say role of group, and that it will read this out as like 1 of 3 or 2 of 3 or whatever button they happen to be on. Next, I want to have a button, and it's going to have a class of button and a class of theme. And then I'm going to add an ARIA label. Now this is important because there's nothing that says essentially what this button is. So I'm going to come in here and say apply, and this one will do light theme. And then I'm also going to add a custom attribute called data theme. Now this is actually the same one we styled on the root, but because we only changed the variables for the root, we're going to use the same exact attribute to essentially point to something else, which is just which theme this button controls. We'll use that in JavaScript to figure out which one we should toggle on for the root itself, for the HTML. Next, I want to come over to hero icons. This is by the maker of Tailwind, and I'm going to look for like light or something like that. Here we go. Let's copy this SVG. I'm just going to paste it in here, and let's make a couple of changes. So I'm going to get rid of this class right here, and I'm just going to say width here needs to be 24. Because I'm not using Tailwind, I need to actually define what that is. All right, and there we go right there. Perfect. All right, next, let's come in here and let's go ahead and grab a, I think it's like moon, something like that. So I'm going to copy this to my clipboard. And in the meantime, let's go ahead and format this document a little bit. And then I'm going to grab all of this right here. And let's paste this down. And next, this button theme should now be pointing to dark, and this should be apply dark mode. And let's go ahead and paste this one in. So here we go. We're going to go through the same basic thing where I come in here and I say width is equal to 24. Again, I'm going to format the document so it's set. And then let's go ahead and copy down one final time. And this one we're going to say apply custom for both of those, and the data theme will also be custom. All right, and then I'm going to come in here and we'll do like shop, I think is the one I grabbed, this storefront. And I'll copy this one out and paste this in. And once again, we'll come in here, remove the classes, and simply say width is equal to 24. Now, one of the things I like about these hero icons is it sets all the colors here to current color. This is something that's been in CSS forever, but basically what it means is the parent controls the color of whatever current color is, in this case, the stroke. So if I change the color of the button, it will actually update the stroke for me, which is really helpful when it comes to theming. Now, the other thing to note here is if you try to link to SVG files, this won't work. So you have to actually have it inline, which is why I put it inline here. All right, so if I save this and come back over this way, you should see that there we are. All three of them are showing up. So that's everything we need as far as the markup is concerned. And now let's go ahead and jump over to the CSS. So I'm going to come just down below here, and we're going to start with that theme wrapper. This is what wrapped everything. And this will be display of grid and place items center. And then I'm going to add a box shadow here. And this will be 0, so nothing left to right. Down will be 0.5 rem. Then we'll have a blur of 0.4 rem. And then I'm going to have HSL here. And this is one of those times where we're going to add a transparency. So I come in here and say 0.05 for my transparency. So if I go ahead and do that, you're going to see I get just this really light transparency showing up right here. Let me go ahead and move back to a default light mode so you can see that showing up. Next, I'm going to have padding of 1 rem. So it gives a little bit of spacing all around. And then let's grab the theme container. That's actually what holds those 3 buttons. So we'll say theme container. And then inside here, I just want this to be display of flex with a gap of 1 rem. So they're spaced out nicely. All right, next we've got the themes themselves. Those are the actual buttons. So here, what I want to do is say that this needs a border radius of 100% view max. So basically, whether the height or the width of the document is larger, use that. This ensures it always is a circle no matter what. Then I'll add a padding of 0.6 em, and that will respond to whatever the font size is. Now, the other thing I'm going to want to do is do display of grid and then place items center to make sure those icons are centered directly in the button. Now, I'll update the styling of this separately because I want to really focus on switching between themes and saving that to local storage. So for now, we're going to call that good. However, I do want to be able to have it to where when you hover over this, you understand what they do. So let's go ahead and add a cursor of pointer so they know they can do that. And then I also need to add here position of relative. So if I do that, that will allow me to have an after pseudo element that then drops down whenever somebody hovers over it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to say theme, and we're going to look at the after element, or you could use the before too. Either way works. And for the content, which you always need on an after or before pseudo element, I'm going to point to an attribute. Now, these are really only useful in after and before pseudo elements right now. I think eventually there's plans to include it elsewhere, but you can essentially grab any attribute. In this case, we've got an ARIA label on there that I added that says basically what the button does. So we're going to use that as the content of this after element. If I just save it here, you're going to see that now it shows immediately because the after element is showing the content of whatever that ARIA label is. In this case, apply light theme, dark theme, and custom theme. Next, though, I want to add this as position absolute, and because I have this as relative, it's absolute in relationship to its parent, that button. Let's go ahead and set the top then as a calculation of 100%, so off the top, plus 1 rem. So that should move it off the bottom of the button 1 rem. For the font size, I'm going to say 0.8 em, and this will be in contrast to the button itself, its font size, which is just inherited by the body right now. Then I'll say min width, and in this case, what I want is I want it to always show its max content. So in other words, it's going to show the entire text of whatever that ARIA label is. Next, I need a padding here of 0.2 em and 0.5 em. And again, I'm using em here because that way it's adaptive as I change my font sizing for the entire project. For my border radius, I want to point this to my variable of radius. And again, this is responsive based on whatever that parent text size is. And for the background color here, let's set it to the same as my background itself. Now you can actually see that text, hopefully, although obviously they're overlapping in this case. And then I'll set the color here to an HSL of text. Finally, I'm going to have another box shadow, and in this case, it's going to have 0 left and right, 0 up and down, and then 0.2 rem of blur. And we'll use the accent, and we will give it some opacity. So like 0.95, something like that. And now it should have a little bit of blur around it, and you can see that. And then I want to do two things. First of all, I want to set the opacity to 0, which means you can't see it obviously right now. And then I'm going to add a transition just on the opacity property. And now here's where we can use some of those other variables. So I can grab my var of speed. Let's do like speed fast. And then we'll do my var of squish. Here we go. And that way I can use these adaptively throughout the layout. All right, now when do I want to see these? Well, I want to see it whenever it's hovered or it's visible. And probably the easiest thing to do here is to use an is selector. You could also use a where selector either way, but basically what this is going to allow me to do is to apply multiple styles just here in a line here, visible, just like that. And then whenever that's the case, whenever it's hovered or the focus is visible, like when I've tabbed to it, then the after element, I want to change the opacity here to 1. So if that worked, I should be able to come over here, and as soon as I hover over it, you see that apply dark theme, apply light theme, all showing up perfectly. All right, so with that set, we are ready to do the JavaScript, and then I'll show you just kind of how this plays out in a real life project next. All right, so let's come over here. I'm going to add, let's just call this like theme.js. And then over here in the HTML, I'm going to scroll up top here, and above the CSS, I'll say script, src, and this will point to theme.js. And then I want to make sure this is the type of module. That way it will defer it, and it also scopes these styles to this, this file as well. So grab this here, and let's go ahead and close this down. And just to make sure it's working, we'll say hi, and then let's pull it up here. Hi. Okay, cool. So back over this way, the first thing I want to do is grab the theme buttons. So let's just point this to document.querySelectorAll, and I'm going to point this to anything with the class of theme, which were all 3 of those buttons. Next, let's go ahead and say themebuttons.forEach. And we'll just take the theme, let's just identify it like this with a little arrow function. We'll say theme.addEventListener. We're listening for a click. Whenever that happens, I'm going to pass off a function to the browser to run that we'll just call handle theme change. So let's go ahead and write that function up top here. So we'll say const handle theme change. Let's make this another arrow function, and we're passing along the event with that, which whenever you pass a function to the browser, it will include an event for any of these event listeners. So now what I can do is grab the theme from that event. So I know that my e.currentTarget, which is the button it was set against, current target, .dataset.theme should be equal to the theme itself. So let's go ahead and do this, and then let's console log the theme. Okay, so here I am. Click here, it should say light, and it does. This should say dark, and it does, and this should say custom. All right, so all those worked as expected. So what do I want to do with this? Well, the very first thing I want to do is update that root. Now, because it's just the HTML, it's the same as the document element. So I can say document.documentElement, and then I can just update the attribute, set attribute. In this case, what I want to do is set data theme to whatever theme it is. All right, just like that. So that means if I come in here and I click over here, it should go to dark. Let's see. There we go, and this should go to custom, and it does. This should go to light theme, and it does. So all these are working as expected. Now, the only trouble is when I come in here and apply this custom dark theme and then I refresh, suddenly it all disappears and it goes back to whatever my system default is. So next, what I want to do is actually update the local storage and then load from a local storage whenever we load the window. So let's do that next. So right below here, I'm going to say local storage.setItem. Now, the local storage lives inside the browser, and it can't be interacted with by, like, it can't be sent to servers or stuff like that. So you can actually store things in people's local browsers, and it will always stay for the same for them on that system. Now in Chrome, it shows here under application, local storage right here. In fact, if I were to pull this open, you can see I've already got this color theme dark from when I've used it before. So I just deleted that. So let's call it something else. Let's not use color theme, because anytime somebody visits this site, whatever your site happens to be, these will be custom to whatever that site is, these local storage items. So let's call it something like my custom theme. Sure, that'll work. And then what we're going to do is pass it the theme. So now if I go ahead and save that, and I come over here and pull this over, and I click on dark, and let's refresh this. There you go. My custom theme is now equal to dark. So we can actually use this value now when we load the browser for the very first time. So let's do that. So now below here, this will be, let's just add this as like event listeners. So we've got our button event listener, and now let's have our window event listener. So window.addEventListener, what I'm listening for in this case is the DOM content loaded. Whenever that's loaded, let's write the arrow function inline this time. What I want to do is see if there is a theme in the local storage. So I'll say const theme equals local storage.getItem. And in this case, what I want to get, but my custom theme. All right, so I'm going to see if there is one. And then if there is a theme, we can use like a logical and here, kind of like a shorthand ternary operator. I can say document.document element.set attribute. And what I can set this to is data theme, just like that. So now it'll look in there when it first loads and actually grab that. Now, if I were to delete this, I'm in light mode. So if I come back and refresh the page and I don't have anything to pull from, it'll use my system default. But as soon as I select something, now this is my default. And if I move over here and come back, you can see it shows right there. Now you may have noticed here I've written it right here and then I've rewritten the same thing here. So you could break that out into its own function if you want to, but for now I'm going to just leave that as is. All right, so that's all there is to it. So you can set these buttons, and now whenever you come back and refresh the page, those will apply everywhere your document uses them. Now lastly, what I want to do is paste in a couple of other things just to show you how this would work in a real life project. So I'm going to come down below here. And let's just get rid of this container itself. I'm just going to go ahead and paste in some more HTML, and you can grab this from the GitHub if you want to, and then I'll come in here and paste this in below here as well. And this is just some styling for all that. So what you can see now is that I've got like cards here, and if I tab over to them, you can see I've got all this custom styling showing up, and same thing here for these forms. I've got all these things moving up and down. Now, when I apply this dark theme, everything just updates automatically, which is pretty cool. Same thing here. Now, how did I do this? Well, it's the same exact thing I've been doing before in the earlier parts of the video. I just use my background, my secondary, my accent all throughout, and then whenever I update those theme variables, everything updates automatically. In addition to that, you can see I'm using some of these other controlling variables like the speed or the type of transition. You can see I'm using other items as well. So like for instance, if I were to come up here and look at, I don't know, this box shadow, it's using these M's, which are responsive to the font size. So that means if I were to come all the way up top and start changing some of these default values automatically, so if I change this to like 20 or something like that, then that should update here once I go back to my light mode. Now everything's kind of a darker orange color, or 10 would be even more red, or like 250-ish is purplish. So all these are going to update automatically. And since the dark and light theme are all themed off of the same color system, you can see how those look really nice. If I move back to this custom one, because I didn't use my hue there, it's still just using whatever these default values are. Same thing here. So if I were to come in here and change this to like 1.2, now all of this adapts perfectly. Or if I change it to like, 2.5, now everything gets a lot bigger, but it does so adaptively as well. And I'll move that back down. So this is a starter guide for kind of thinking about theming and using CSS variables when it comes to color schemes especially, to then use the user preference as the default or their own custom selection as kind of the override for anything in your entire site. Once you get used to using CSS variables like this, it's hard to ever go back because you get the power all in native CSS, which is great. Now, if you're interested more in how I did these button styles or how I did these forms below, I've done videos recently on both of those, and I'll make sure that I link them in the description so you can check those out. Hey, well, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great one. Happy coding.